And speaking of AI, a absolutely staggering pair of sort of news announcements that hit the exact same time, and
Hmm.
the irony is like rich. So Salesforce's AI research arm released a piece of research that talked about the efficacy uh, of benchmarks, I guess, really, when it
Yes.
I'll let you explain this, but of benchmarks when it comes to agentic AI sort of workloads, and their how well they work. And at the same time as that, and in full disclosure, right, as far as I understand it, Salesforce AI research does operate independently, right? So it's a funded arm. But at the same time, where this report is basically saying, hey, these AI agents are not very good at actually being working, Salesforce announces a price increase. So around all of this, which I think is just absolutely fascinating how these two are sort of living, and sort of really speaks volumes to the state of AI today.
Yeah, so starting with the research side, because I love research, Salesforce AI Research came out with this interesting paper showing that, uh, of course, we are having trouble benchmarking business processes such as sales or configure price quote or marketing type processes. So Salesforce created this new benchmark called CRMArena-Pro, meant to figure out how well LLMs are able to negotiate some of the more complex capabilities associated with service cases or sales lead routing or lead qualification, things that are very specific to the revenue office, and basically finding that LLMs are only able to.
And I should have not uncoincidentally the very use cases that Agent Force is predominantly designed to execute against, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Obviously, these are Salesforce centric use cases, but of course, Salesforce has a very vested interest in trying to figure out whether LLMs work well with these use cases, and found that basically LLMs were able to get through about 60% of the time. 40% of these were failures, which I think passes the sniff test. Like if I were to guess how well LLMs are going to get through complex business and sales use cases, yeah, I could see, 50-60% feels about right. I don't think you'd get much better than that. But so we're saying, well, generative AI and AI in general is still having some real problems getting through these complex use cases. So in response, of course, on the business side, Salesforce looks at this and says, okay, it's time to either raise prices or rationalize prices, depending on your perspective.
Well, so first of all, we should add a couple things to this particular research when we look at it. Is not only was it about that 58% was the number, so about 60%, but that was on the single step sort of workflow or single step sort of actions, right? When it became multi-step, i.e., more complex workflows, that number fell into the 30% range, which is pretty shocking because most business use cases are in fact multi-step.
Hmm.
And so, that was fairly shocking. The maybe not as shocking, or maybe more positively, the things that the agents were best at were things that were much more workflow centric, right? So things where we have a more defined workflow. And again, I try to explain people how to think about this. And in many cases, the way you train an agent like this is you give it instructions much like you would give a human, right?
Hmm.
This is the business logic, and no different than a human. The more clear that business logic is, the more clear the process is, step A, step B, step C, the more likely it is that the human and the agent are going to execute it effectively. And the more ambiguous, the more amorphous it is. It's like, well, if it's this and if it's that and if it's not, that's going to get harder, right? And I think we sort of had this idea that somehow agents were going to miraculously be better at it because somewhere deep in there were these deep hidden patterns, and that may eventually be true, but it's going to take a whole lot of very specific training to get there. So, I took a look at this, and I maybe I should be more, but I'm not actually that critical of it. To your point, I think that what this is a very honest and fair assessment as to the current state. And to their credit, the whole purpose of this was that the current benchmarks, because we sort of railed against this in the past, right? That there's a lot of these AI benchmarks that sort of say that how well these AI agents are working, and they often come across as glowing glowing successes.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of this research was to say, from an enterprise perspective, almost all of that research or all those benchmarks right now are based on B2C use cases. They're based on pretty simplistic use cases. And so maybe we shouldn't take these glowing assessments quite at face value. Mm-hmm. And so to their credit, that's what they're pointing out here. And of course, exposing that there's a lot of work to be done, including in their own platform. But again, I think we would find that this is not specific to ChatGPT. It's certainly not specific to Agentforce. This is something that I think this is the state of the sector right now. And so as if you're a CIO, you need to go in knowing this, that right. you need to be well clearly defined on your business logic, on your workflows, and have very clear an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish if you want to find success with it. But
right, because we're seeing with say generative AI, we can use LLM just fine. If you ask a basic question, you will probably get the answer that you're looking for. But we make the mistake of thinking that because we can do this kind of search engine-ish use, that's the best way to use LLMs, which is first not true. And then second, we make the mistake of sometimes thinking because we can do that one thing that it will be useful for, just to name a couple of additional use cases here, like named entity disambiguation, doing that disambiguation across different data sets where you might have 10 different fields that are all named department and trying to figure out which one is the right thing for what you're looking for. That is something where LLMs are going to struggle unless you do further agentic training and custom prompting and grounding to figure out what exactly the context is and what you're looking for. That is going to require some actual work on the IT office's part.
Yeah, and I do think this is another example where there's a rationalization process that I think most enterprise leaders aren't yet prepared for. Mm-hmm. You're going to have there's this balancing act, because this isn't magic. You don't just throw an agent at it and go, it's going to magically makes this all work. You have to look at it and decide, is the effort to train it? In some cases, the effort to train the agent is going to outweigh the cost of just solving the problem in traditional mechanisms and manners, right? And so you have to weigh that out. And a lot of it is going to be, how widespread is this, or how long-standing is this issue? If it's going to continue, then it's worth that investment, because really building a capability. And that's really what I tell people when we think about agentic solutions, is you need to be thinking about a capability. Is it worth actually building that as a resource?